Stay tuned as we talk to Groton Town Manager, Mark Oefinger, about the proposed Groton Town budget on this week's edition of Welcome to Groton. Hi, I'm Cindy Morrison, and this is Welcome to Groton. Today, our guest is Town Manager Mark Oefinger. Thanks for coming.
Hi, Cindy. Thank you so much. Good to see you.
I wish the topic were a lighter one, but we are here to talk about the proposed budget. Can you give us an overview?
Sure. Well, the budget's available. By charter, it has to be out by March 15th, and it is now on the town's website and copies at the various libraries. A very difficult budget year. I seem to say that every year, but with all the uncertainty in Hartford and the amount of state aid that we will get, it's going to make for a very interesting April and May in terms of our deliberations. At this point, the expenditure side of the budget from a proposed standpoint is known. The entire budget's around $125 million. It's up around 2.9% over the current year budget. Around $3.5 million additional in expenditures are being proposed. But the real story this year is going to be the revenue side, and that is there's a great deal of uncertainty with respect to state revenues. That's reflected in the budget in that we've identified 4 different scenarios for the council and the RTM to consider. I chose one of the proposals, one of the scenarios, I should say, just so that we have a starting point. So it's going to be a very interesting couple of months of discussion. And I think, unfortunately, for not only Groton, but for most of the communities in the state, we probably won't know what our state aid is going to be until after we have to adopt the budget.
Right, so you have to set up all these contingency plans. How much of the budget is directly under your oversight? Well,
the budget that is available no later than March 15th is commonly referred to as the town manager's proposed budget. And I think what that means is it's up to the manager to pull all the various pieces together, be they Board of Ed requests or subdivisions, outside agencies, and so forth. But the fact of the matter is the manager and the people that report to him or her represent, the dollar amount is less than 30% of the entire budget. But so the big budget document, commonly known as the town manager's proposed budget, but in reality around 30% of that budget is something that the manager has direct control over.
Oof. 30% is still a big chunk.
Yes, it is. Absolutely.
How long does it take you to do that?
Sure. I mean, the town budget process is laid out in detail in the town charter. We generally start in October. There have been years we've started earlier.
Wow.
We really haven't started any later than that. So we start working on it in October. Requests go out to the department heads for information, and there's a back and forth between the departments and the finance department and the manager's office. But we, as I mentioned, we need to have a budget ready to go and out and available to the public by March 15th. Right. So it's a 5, sometimes 6-month process. And then the real fun begins, because once it's available, the council needs to have a public hearing, which they usually have towards the end of March. They spend all of April, the town council, reviewing the budget. They send a tentative mill rate, and then they hand it off to the RTM, and then the RTM spends most of May going through the budget. It then goes back to the council to establish the final mill rate no later than the last week of May or the first week of June.
Wow. There's a lot of great information for anyone who's new to Groton, but even just a reminder to us of how much effort goes into this and the hours you guys put in.
Correct. There's hundreds of hours that go into putting the budget together.
We've recently heard about the proposed $14 million reduction of the education cost sharing funds. How has that impacted the town?
That's the big unknown. The governor released his proposed budget early in February. Part of his budget called for major changes to education cost-sharing formula, ECS formula
Right.
it's commonly referred to. In terms of ECS funding, we're losing around $9.4 million in funding. And in some instances, people think of it as 14 million, as you suggested,
Right.
but there's also funds that he's proposing, additional funds he's proposing to give to the town. So the delta from an education standpoint is a little over $9 million, a significant port, well over a third of the funding that we currently get from the state for education. In addition to that, there's around $3.9 million that he is proposing that the Town of Groton and other communities will need to pay to cover 1/3 of the cost of teachers' retirement.
The pension.
The pension.
Yeah.
That is, teachers are in a state pension program, and this year the governor is proposing that each community pay 1/3 of their teachers' costs, which for us is projected to be around $3.9 million. So you take the $9 million plus and the 3.9, and you're pretty close to a $14 million delta or change in the amount of funding
Right.
that we're going to get from the
And
state.
again, that's not just the Board of Ed's budget, that's the town's budget.
Well, I mean, ultimately, I mean, some people have argued, well, that's, you know, that may be the Board of Ed's problem. I
Right.
don't think that's how this community is ever looked at.
I don't think
These
so.
are all dollars that come to the town. They have to be spent on Board of Ed, but the state funding only pays a portion of the funding that's needed. The town, the taxpayers, contribute the rest of it. So I'm sure as we go through the budget, there's going to be a lot of deliberations about how much we should cut, should we be thinking it's a $14 million reduction, or
Right.
is it some other number that we should be focusing in on? And then I'm sure there will be lots of discussion about how much of the funding should come from the Board of Ed versus town operations
yeah.
versus subdivisions versus the other service areas that we budget.
That's a lot of unknowns.
It is a tremendous number of unknowns. Historically, we have always used the governor's numbers, except for one year where we modified something. It was Governor Rell at the time was proposing. Historically, using the governor's numbers have served us well. We usually end up with a little bit more money than what he or she was proposing. This year, in trying to get a handle on revenues, I did not use the governor's number. I think there's so much uncertainty to those numbers. Actually, the scenario that we use to help determine a proposed mill rate really relied on, what we're doing is we're taking what are our revenues for the current year, not next year, the current year, and then subtracting $5 million from that. So
Okay.
it's not the $9 million, it's not the $14 million, it's a
five.
$5 million reduction. There's nothing magical. I could have said $3 million, I could have said $6 million, I could have said nothing. But in order to facilitate the discussions that need to take place in April and May, I thought it would be a good idea to at least have a number to shoot for.
solid number, yeah.
And the council may change it, the RTM may change it, but at least it helps us start to think about how do we want to deal with this budget with all the uncertainty, not only in terms of bottom line numbers, but the process.
Oh, yes.
Because that's really what, when folks have had a chance to look at the manager's transmittal memo, a lot of it focuses in on how should we try to deal with this during our deliberations in April and May.
Right.
Because I'm pretty sure we will not know. We certainly won't know in
No.
April, and I doubt that we're going to know in May what the state's really doing. Because what we're hearing from the state, and I understand why they're saying this, is they want to know what their revenues are before they put a budget together.
yeah.
That to me means April 15th, which really, when taxes are due, but it takes weeks to count up the taxes. So
Correct.
you're probably talking sometime in May. I understand why they want to do that, but this indecision or inability to have a state budget now puts 169 cities and towns in peril by
Yeah.
not knowing what their revenues
That's
are.
a lot of time to be waiting to hear.
Correct.
Oh, wow. I want to talk to you more about why Groton's kind of being singled out, but let's do that after the break.
Sure.
And we'll continue the conversation with Town Manager Mark Oefinger.
Open up your books to page 360.
Did you just look at your phone while you was in class? You played yourself.
Talking about inspirational quotes.
You gotta believe in yourself. Don't ever play yourself. The key is to make it, so make it.
Louise, can you give me an example of an inspirational quote?
Don't play yourself. The key is to make it.
And who said that?
I did. Now that's a major key alert.
Learn the real major keys to getting to college at getschool.com.
You're going to need me. You're going to need us. All of us. You're going to need our help with your water, your air, your food. You're going to need our determination, our compassion. You're going to need the next generation of leaders to face the challenges the future will bring. And we promise we'll be there when you need us.
Welcome back to Welcome to Groton. We're here today talking to Town Manager Mark Oefinger. We were just talking about the fiscal year 2018 budget. It seems from everything I've been hearing and some of what you've been saying, Groton is kind of getting singled out from the state. Why is that?
Well, that's partially correct. I don't think we were purposely singled out. It just happened that with the new formula that's been developed for education cost sharing, Groton is now known as the biggest loser in terms of ECS funding, almost $14 million delta in terms of the funding we used to get versus the funding we're proposed to get. As I said, I don't think it was intentional. We've gone from a formula that has been so complicated, the ECS formula has been so complicated that the state really hasn't run it in 15 to 20 years. They would every once in a while add a couple percentage points increases to what communities got, but they have not, as I understand it, rerun the formula. And the reason that I've heard over the years is it's so complicated. Now, the new formula, which I will not profess that I perfectly understand, but it seems to be overly simplified. I mean, one of the criteria that they're using in determining the community's ability to pay or the reason why they may need more state assistance is simply using the community's grand list. We have a very large grand list with Pfizer and EB. We have but 90% of the formula is relying on that information. 10% of the formula is taking a look at a family's ability to pay. And as we all know in Groton, we have a very, very diverse population.
Yes, we do.
We have very, very expensive homes in some parts, particularly along the coastline, and then we have very modest homes in our community. And most people don't realize over 50% of our housing stock is multifamily. That, I'm pretty sure that 10% factor is not, it doesn't fully recognize what Groton is all about. And we're hoping that not only this year, but maybe over the next couple of years, the formula can be revisited and there's greater effort made to come up with a more fair formula for all communities. We're an anomaly. I'm sure other communities are anomalies too.
Right.
But from a pure dollar standpoint, we do have the unfortunate reputation of being the biggest loser from a dollar standpoint.
Kind of makes me sad because I know how great Groton is, and to kind of hear that we're getting picked on, but it sounds like you have a great plan that you're trying to work out. Why are you trying to get the budget ready if the state is not ready?
Well, we have our process for putting together and reviewing a proposed budget is laid out in great detail in our town charter.
Yes.
We can't change the charter in short order. I mean, we could have a charter revision commission. In fact, we actually do have a charter revision commission looking at the charter, but that takes months and months and months. Now, there have been reports in the local newspaper about other towns contemplating changing their budget schedule. Those towns are not charter towns.
Okay.
Their budget process, in all likelihood, in most instances, is laid out by ordinance. Ordinances you can do relatively quickly. On the other hand, I do have to I try to remind folks when asked this question that, well, even delaying it, in all likelihood, you still have to have a budget adopted
Right.
by July 1st, because there will be no money available to fund town or Board of Ed or any other operations that currently receives funding from the Town of Groton. So while having a couple extra weeks may be helpful,
Right.
the bottom line is you still need to get a budget together.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of what we've talked about in our transmittal memo is hopefully going to assist the council and the RTM to try to get to that end. I do believe there is legislation on the books right now that was passed last year that would give communities like Groton until the end of June.
Okay.
And there's talk of some maybe other legislative relief that Hartford may consider. But the fact of the matter, you still need to have a budget pretty much
Well,
ready
yeah,
to go.
you have to have
But-
the plan, and
Right, right.
it's not just
You need to get tax bills out, even if you did get a little bit of a reprieve, you still have to put a budget together.
Yeah. And it's
so-
not just one office doing it, it's many offices
It
working in
involves, there
collaboration.
are many people involved in the budget, all the town departments, the Board of Ed, the City of Groton, Groton Long Point, the fire, I mean, there's a lot of people, a lot of moving parts in the
Yes.
town's budget. And all of those entities, need to have some certainty at some point, fairly early on in the fiscal year, that they know what type of money they should be expecting, either from the state or from the town or wherever they get their revenue from.
Yeah. The budget planning is amazing. Just curious, how many budgets have you now gone through?
This is my 15th
Your 15th.
budget. Yep.
Moving ahead, why can't we move our budget deliberations until after the state has finished the process?
We don't have the ability to do that. I mean, it really two reasons: the town charter, as we just talked about, and also from a practical standpoint, if the state didn't have a budget together until September or October, we won't have the funding to keep the lights on
Right.
in the new fiscal year. So we
That'd be-
really don't have that luxury. Federal government does it all the time. We've all heard the term continuing resolution, where they set aside funding to get through another month and then another month. And, that's something that we've never done here. I'm not saying, there are communities that send out one tax bill and then send out another tax bill later
That is
on.
true.
Not something that I really want to propose at this point in time.
That's good to know.
Supplemental tax bill.
That's good to know. What is Town of Groton's overall grand list looking like?
The grand list, this was a reval year. So
Okay.
every 5 years under state statute, towns have to do a revaluation. And so we've recently just completed our revaluation. It's commonly referred to as the October 1st, 2016 reval. Those numbers are what we will be basing our mill rate on once a budget is adopted. The overall grand list this year went down. It was expected to go down because of the reval.
Okay.
It's not that buildings were knocked down or whatever. It had more to do with the market value of properties in the community. It did not go down nearly as much as we were
Hoping.
that we were fearful of. At one
Oh.
point, we thought it was going to go down 7-8%, but it went down much less than that. But there is an impact of it going down, and we try to point out in the budget that if all things were equal and we were using the new grand list to determine the budget mill rate for last year, the mill rate would be $0.5 higher because
Okay.
of the grand list going down. So part of the proposed mill rate increase is a direct result of the
the
grand
new.
list went down. You still are raising the same amount of money. Some properties went up in value, some properties went down, but you'd have to raise the mill rate a $0.5 in order to make up those dollars that you lost in value.
Right, definitely. Without taking into consideration the governor's proposed reduction in aid, town spending down overall, or is there an increase included in the town side of the budget?
Great question. Overall, the proposed budget calls for around $3.5 million of additional expenditures
Okay.
spending. Every single one of the areas of service, be it town operations, Board of Ed, outside agencies, subdivisions, debt service and capital improvement, all of them are up to varying degrees.
Right.
Not significantly, in my opinion. I mean, contingency's up quite a bit because there's some unknowns with
Well,
respect
yeah.
to labor negotiations. We're trying to set some money aside, but it's a relatively, all things being equal, relatively small amount of money. But they're all of the service areas are up a little bit this year.
And Groton has great services offered to it, so kudos to everybody making that work
Yep.
as low as they can. If someone would like to review the proposed town budget, where can they do so?
Well, the town budget is on the town's website. We also have physical copies at all of the 3 libraries in the community: Bill Memorial, Mystic Noink, and the Groton Public Library. If people want to purchase a copy, they can either approach the manager's office or the town clerk's office. We have very few extra copies. They'd be fairly expensive, but some people like paper as opposed to looking at it on a computer screen. But we have made enhancements so you can go on your computer and go right to the section you want, as opposed to downloading 300 plus pages
that's good.
of the budget doc. If you're interested in public works or the manager's office or outside agencies, they're all indexed so you can get to them fairly easily.
That's very nice. Could you remind us where and when the budget public hearing is?
Sure, the budget public hearing is on March 29th. It's at 7 p.m. at the Groton Senior Center.
Mark, thank you very much for coming in today and talking and explaining everything and all the aspects of the budget. I think the viewers will really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Cindy. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Stay tuned as we look at the upcoming town meetings for the next 2 weeks. For more information about the proposed town budget, you can call 860-441-6630 or visit the town website, groton-ct.gov, to see a copy of the budget. Thanks for watching, and I hope you join us for the next edition of Welcome to Groton.